coming up with Goswell T.K. Mensah on the theme, Leadership. Be inspired.
Hi, welcome to this new month. We are dealing with the concept of leadership. Last month through to this month, leadership is our focus and our point of study. We look at the prong of leadership. We look at the purpose of leadership. We look at the place of personal leadership. And we look at the price of leadership. So today we want to deal with the principles of leadership. We want to look at the foundation, the doctrine of leadership. To drive this effectively is to look at, to me, the best leader of all time. If you're not a Christian, just as we use other excelled leaders of personality and profile them, you look at this personality as such. His name is Jesus. To me, he is the greatest leader of all time. You want to ask me why? After over 2,000 years of existence, he still have the largest following in the history of the world. He put up the greatest leadership team the world has ever seen. And no wonder today, he's still the centerpiece of civilization and in fact, the entire world. So we want to glean what were his leadership principles. This will be the object of our study today. So I'm going to divide this into two parts, a part 1 and a part 2. So I'm going to share 9 leadership principles from the life of Jesus. As an anchoring text, I will use Mark chapter 10, verse 42 through to verse 45. This is what the Bible says. But Jesus called them to himself and said to them, "You know that those who are considered rulers over the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. Yet it shall not be so among you. But whoever desires to become great among you shall be your servant, and whoever of you desires to be first shall be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many." Principle number 1 is you need to have a source for your leadership principle. 2, one of the principles of leadership is Jesus called the disciples to himself. He's about to teach them the foundation, the doctrine of leadership. So the first principle in terms of leadership development is to define which shall be my source. You need a credible source. You need an effective and a right source. If you derive your leadership principles, virtues or values from the wrong source, it goes without saying. The entire principle, in fact, the very foundation on which you build your leadership, if it is faulty, everything else is faulty. Principle number 1, build your leadership on a very credible source. The second principle that Christ gave, according to the text, is a call to be a nonconformist. A call to be a nonconformist. Let's look at the text quite carefully. Mark 10 from verse 42 to 43. The Bible says, "You know that those who are considered rulers over the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them." And here is the point of emphasis. "Yet it shall not be so among you." So Christ was saying, if you want to develop a leadership principle, be a nonconformist. Don't just follow the crowd. Jesus says the Gentiles, the leadership principle of the day is those who are in charge of leadership, they suppress the followers. They abuse the followers. They submerge the followers. But Jesus says that should not be so. In other words, regardless of the leadership principles around us, we must be nonconformist. We must not go along. We need to have a backbone. We need to have a stand. When the entire world is moving the left, let's be resolute. Build a leadership principle on the philosophy to be a nonconformist. Don't just follow the crowd. Don't go along by getting along. Have a stand. Have a backbone. Have a principle. Stand for something within your leadership development, or so to speak, or principle. Principle number 1, have a source. Principle number 2, Be a nonconformist. That leads us to principle number 3 in terms of leadership development, or building the foundation or the principle of leadership. The third leadership principle is leadership is offering useful service. Not just a service, useful service. Look at the way Jesus couched it. Mark chapter 10, verse 43. He says, "But whoever desires to be great among you shall be servant," or your servant. In other words, Christ had no problem in being a great person. He doesn't rebuke, or he did not rebuke his disciples to be great. Nonetheless, he provided a framework, a pathway to being great. Jesus is saying, if you want to be great, you need to offer useful service. So he says, whoever desires to be great among you, let him be your servant. In other words, if we ever want to be leaders, we need to render useful service in the community, in the nation, in the church. As we are having leadership or elections coming, these are the principles that must determine who we will be voting for, who will lead the church, who will lead the nation, who will lead that organization. The third leadership principle is you need to understand, as I want to lead people, it must be premised on a very useful service I am offering for people. Be a servant. Don't lord it over people. Offer something. Leadership is about offering youthful service. The fourth leadership principle is giving away your right, or I can couch it, being available, or leadership is about availability, giving away your right. Mark chapter 10 verse 44, Jesus says, and I quote, "Whoever of you desires to be first shall be slave of all." Take note, Jesus is not against being the first. It's okay to be the first, but he provided a framework through which one can be the first and be the first effectively. And Jesus says, to be the first, you must be a slave. In other words, if you want to be a leader, one of the principles you need to derive is, I must slave for all. Not just that. In other words, I must be the last to enjoy the booty. I must be the last to complain. I must be the last to take the resources. I must be the last to be the beneficiary. Everybody must be served before you are served. Whoever wants to be the first, whoever wants to be a leader, must be slave. Slaves do not have right. They give away their right. In other words, the call to leadership, the principle is you do not have a right of your own. You are surrendering your private right so that you can serve the public. The first principle of leadership is you need to have a source. The second principle is you must be a nonconformist. And then we said the third leadership principle, you need to offer youthful service. And the last one is you need to give away your right. My name is Godswill Mensa. I want to be part of your life as we glean and develop principles of leadership. Wherever you find yourself on God's beautiful planet, spend some time. Let's gather around the social media handles as we glean, as we study on the principles of leadership. Stay blessed and be faithful.